Actually, I had one of the... let me just bring in Mr. D. Shelmerdine here. Derek, welcome to Meridian, and lovely to see you again.
Oh, it's great to be back, and it's that time of the year again.
It is indeed. But I was at a party on... I can't remember. When was it? About last Saturday, I think it was. It was last Saturday. And we got sort of talking. We always talk music, you know, and I just said, let's play a little game with name a band that has made it really big, but you just can't understand why they made it. Because there's something, I mean, to be honest, I named my two, which I absolutely loathe. I can't understand. One is Kiss, and one is Def Leppard. Now, I mean, there's plenty of people perhaps listening now will think I'm completely nuts for saying something like that because they think they're the greatest thing since sliced bread. Personally, I can't hear anything they do that is remotely musical or worth listening to. But my mate Ian, who is a great guy, is an absolutely lovely guy, great musician, etc., etc. But he said he couldn't understand how Bad Company made it or Free. He couldn't understand it. He just didn't get it at all. Yeah. And that one, I must admit, it knocked me for six because, you know, I just thought there's plenty of bands that perhaps, you know, I don't know, they're a bit, I don't know, you might say someone like Rush or something, you know, or I personally think are a great band, but some people find them sort of pretentious and over-the-top proggy stuff. I can sort of see where they're coming from. But a band like Free, I just thought they were so sort of just there. Do you know what I mean? They just sort of, they sit there, they play well, they sing well. Bad Company are in the same bracket to me anyway.
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly Free.
Yeah.
I mean, David Kossoff, you know, he's got to be up there with the
Paul Kossoff, you mean?
Yeah, sorry,
David was his dad. Yeah, his dad.
Yeah, exactly.
David, yeah. But I just couldn't quite grasp it. Well, that one, I mean, you know, Ian, man, if you lost, you've knocked me for six for that one. Anyway, we've diverted as always. That's what we always do on this show.
Always a good thing.
But we're doing the old Christmas tune tonight, aren't we? The Christmas
absolutely.
song.
Yeah, absolutely.
What defines a Christmas song? Is it sleigh bells? What is it?
What you've got, interestingly enough, is if you look at American charts over the years, they've had almost zero songs which are about Christmas in some way. I suppose loosely you could say that it wants to be something that makes some kind of reference to Christmas. But there have been very, very few Christmas songs. If you think, you know, would they have sleigh bells in or are talking about Father Christmas or whatever? Actually, very, very few. And in the 60s, it was very uncool. There were a couple of hits at the sort of early 60s, people like Brenda Lee with Rockin' Round the Christmas Tree. But very few. And in the 70s, it seemed to be a time when, I mean, a couple of those we'll be getting to shortly, that Christmas songs sort of came into its own.
It was. I mean, do you think the 70s was it? You know, that was the main body of Christmas songs in the 70s.
Well, people like Cliff Richard, he had a very, very lean time. I mean, he has got to be the most successful. If you look at people who had hits in the Christmas week, the chart of, Christmas Day, whatever that current chart was, he's almost certainly had more, 10 times, 100 times more, well, perhaps not 100 times more, but certainly loads more than anybody else. And the 70s was his leanest period.
Was it really?
Yeah, the 60s he was very successful, and the 80s and 90s he was very successful.
Yeah.
So I don't think there's any golden age of Christmas songs.
Well, the only reason I say it is because obviously when you hear the Christmas tune played on the radio now, the vast majority of them seem to be the ones that came from the 70s.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, that was when you did have a revival in Christmas songs. In the 60s, there weren't any. I mean, the Beatles didn't have any Christmas songs. They had 4 number ones at Christmas, and they were in the charts an awful lot of Christmases. Because you've got to remember, they had their first hit in October 1962, and it was all over by the Christmas of 1970. So, you know, that's only about 8 Christmases. It's a fascinating time. I mean, if you want the epitome of the Christmas song, I think it's the one I thought we'd start with, White Christmas. I mean, there's a fabulous website called Secondhand Songs, And what they do is they list not necessarily every single one that's ever been, but it is a fabulous website if you're interested in who's covered what and which songs have been covered by whom, as it were. And they list 1,224 covers of White Christmas. I mean, the song itself was written by Irving Berlin in 1940 and originally performed and recorded by Bing Crosby. I mean, everybody associates White Christmas with Bing Crosby. And it's reckoned to be the best-selling single of all time. It's reckoned to have sold 50 million copies. The one that's usually bandied around as the biggest selling is the 1997 Candle in the Wind, the Princess Diana Elton John. Yeah. But that's really because the sort of monetary, the charts themselves didn't really start until the 50s. So that's the one that more records have been, no pun intended, have been kept of, as it were. But I mean, it's got a really interesting history. White Christmas. It had its first public performance on Christmas Day 1941. Bing Crosby on his NBC radio show Kraft Music Hall. You find an awful lot of radio and TV programs at that time. We had a sponsor, and the show is actually named after the sponsor. So you get all kinds of General Motors shows and all kinds of interesting stuff. And it was apparently recorded on 29th of May 42 originally in 18 minutes. That is absolutely unbelievable. He must have sang it through 2 or 3 times, and the guy on the desk must have said, yeah, that'll do. That's very nice. Yeah, we'll have that. Thank you very much. 18 minutes. On to the next one.
And that obviously included all the strings as well that were on it.
Yeah, I mean, it's listed as being recorded in 18 minutes. Because the thing is, of course, in those days, there wasn't all this multi-tracking.
No.
So what the bands used to do, and it's like this in the 60s, they were essentially live recordings in the studio.
Yeah.
So basically, an artist would just go in, and the band would be in the background. They'd have a little screen round the drummer, so you could hear somebody else. And they just basically performed it. So unless they made a mistake...
Yeah.
Job done.
And I know perhaps they got paid as well. I mean, the quicker you get it done, the more you earn, perhaps.
Yeah, absolutely.
Could be.
Oh, I mean, a lot of these guys. I think the drummer who stood in for Love Me Do, I think he was famously paid about 25 quid.
Yeah.
For that particular session, which was a lot of money at the time.
Absolutely.
By lots of pints of beer.
Yeah.
Because pints of beer in 1962 would have been about a shilling, about 5 pence.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you could get absolutely double dog wasted on a pound.
Not the £4, not the £4
Exactly.
5 pence that I spent on a pint of beer the other day.
Absolutely, but it was actually released because it was actually from the movie Holiday Inn, and that movie came out in the summer of 1942. And what they did, they released the soundtrack on 6 singles. So White Christmas came out as one of those singles in the July of 1942. And by October it was number 1.
It came out in July?
It came out in July.
Oh, that must have felt weird.
Yeah, but by October it was number 1 on what was then the national list of retail records charts.
I suppose when you think about it, he's saying, I'm dreaming of a White Christmas, so he is looking ahead. Well, but I didn't think he'd be looking that far ahead.
Well, Holiday Inn isn't actually about Christmas. I mean, there is another film that people confuse it with called White Christmas, but that didn't come out in 1954. So, I mean, it's not basically a Christmas film.
So it's not really a Christmas song. It's just the fact that he just happens to mention, I'm dreaming of one.
Christmas, yeah. I can't remember the context of it now, to be honest. I've seen the film, I mean, a long time ago. But in 1947, he re-recorded it because the master was damaged. And it's that second recording that's the one that you tend to hear most of now. I mean, there are versions available, and it's not that difficult to find some streaming service, Spotify or whatever, that has the 1946 original. And it is slightly different. I mean, they try to recreate the original as much as possible. And it
obviously is still the original if you watch Holiday Inn.
Yeah.
They haven't sort of...
No, that was the one from Holiday Inn, that original. But the masters were used that much. It's such a popular song that they got damaged and you had to re-record it. It's interesting to have a little listen to the two because they are slightly different. But I mean, the covers include Elvis had it on his first Christmas album in 1957. That shows how cool the song is. I mean, 1957, Elvis was ginormous. He was an absolutely massive success. That was like the Beatles in 1963 in the UK, from sort of zero to, hero, to say the least. But then you got people like Big Maybelle, who did the original version of Whole Lot of Shaking Going On, that we tend to think of as Jerry Lee Lewis in about 58. Pinky and Perky, the lovely little pigs.
Oh, lovely.
They had a version in 61. Beach Boys in 64. Temptations in 70. Stiff Little Fingers in 1980.
I was going to say, have there been any, relatively modern coverings by, more known bands?
Oh,
as well?
It's covered every year. I mean, if you have a look through that list of 1,224 cover versions, I mean, they're just about everybody. Tottenham Hotspur actually decided they'd make a football hero of it in 81. Of course, Phil Spector and his classic 63 album, Darling Love, covers that. So it is the epitome of the Christmas song, but actually released in the summer. So
incredible.
A good start. A lot of Christmas songs were recorded in the summer.
Well, they would be, wouldn't they? I suppose, wouldn't they? Yeah.
I mean, when we get to talk about Wizard, I mean, the lengths they went to feel Christmassy in the middle of summer.
Yeah.
Absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
But I mean, coming forward a little bit to the 80s, one of my all-time favourites has got to be the Pogues, Fairytale of New York. Kept off the top position, only made it to number 2 in the UK. Kept off by Pet Shop Boys. Always on My Mind, another great song. So that was the number 1 in Christmas week. But it's got in passing, Shane MacGowan, Happy Birthday on Christmas Day.
Oh.
Born on Christmas Day. I mean, to write one of the greatest Christmas songs of all time and be born on Christmas Day, I mean, that guy must love Christmas. But the song came about, interesting, basically. Elvis Costello, who'd co-produced Rum, Sodomy and The Lash, a great Pogues album, he wagered Shane MacGowan that he couldn't write a Christmas duet with the lady, I'm not sure if she was his wife or his girlfriend or future wife, Kate O'Riordan, who was the bass player in the band at the time.
All right. So
Jem Finer, another guy in the band, who wrote with MacGowan, they sort of picked up the bet and put a song together. Jem Finer reckons it was based on some friends in New York, and Jem Finer had already written a Christmas song that he'd abandoned, and what they did, they used the melody of that for Fairytale, with lots of reworking of the lyrics. Now there is actually a version with Kate O'Riordan that was recorded by Elvis Costello that is around. I'm not sure it was ever, it will have been commercially released, but that is not the one that's the big hit. What happened was they met Steve Lillywhite because he was producing their next album, If I Should Fall from Grace with God, and his wife or future wife at the time was Kirsty MacColl. So they finished the song off. The name itself comes from a book called A Fairy Tale of New York, written by J.P. Donlevy, and it just happened that Jem Finer was reading that at the time.
Doesn't really matter how often you hear that, does it?
No, it's absolute classic. I mean,
it's a great song.
So good.
I mean, regardless of its Christmassy element, it's just a good song, isn't it? It is just a good song.
Yeah. I mean, the Pogues are a great band. But, I mean, that has got to be... And that is one of the ones. I mean, there are half a dozen that every Christmas you can guarantee you'll hear it every single day.
And why not, really?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Although saying that, I think this is the first time I've heard it this Christmas so far.
Yeah. Excellent. A first. You heard it here first.
Oh, yeah. Fairytale in New York from the Pogues, of course.
But, I mean, almost certainly the most famous has to be Slade. And, we could hardly enter into this kind of conversation without a look at the Slade one, because that's got another one with a really interesting background to it. It wasn't... wasn't just written this really was a Christmas song. It was written by Noddy Holder and Jim Lee from the band, produced by Chas Chandler, of course, who everybody knows he was the manager of Jimi Hendrix Party Company around the Electric Ladyland time. But in 1970, he became they were Ambrose Slade at the time. He became their manager, and it was his idea to produce a Christmas song. This one actually was very successful, came straight in at number one. We're talking 1973, a very dark time in British social history, as we'll see the reason behind the writing of the song. Straight in number one, 5 weeks at number one, and it was the last number one Slade have had. And the probability is that Noddy Holder keeps saying he won't go back on the road. I mean, Slade are on the road with a couple of them. Actually, the two that didn't write this and other songs are the two which are out and about now, promoting the Slade back catalogue and some new ones. Sold 500,000 copies within the first week of release, and it's been released every decade since 1973. Absolutely incredible. I mean, that was the one that famously tussled with Wizard. I Wish It Could Be Christmas Every Day, and it's that Wizards peaked at number 4. But I mean, we'll talk about that because that's a really interesting one as well. I mean, Noddy was the last one to join the In-Betweens of the band, and that was back in like mid-1966. I mean, you think Slade, you think, 70s, 80s, but they've been beavering away like so many other bands in the late 60s without any success. And by the sort of middle of 69, they would call themselves Ambrose Slade, and that's when Chas Chandler got involved with them. And in 73, when Chas Chandler suggested, why don't we write a Christmas song, lads? But remembering that I mentioned before, there hadn't been much in the way of Christmas singles in the 60s. It wasn't as though, there was a whole plethora of them. Every year it was a Christmas song topping the charts. I mean, it's very rare for a Christmas, Father Christmas type song to be anywhere near the charts. But Jim Lee came up with the idea for the song. He remembered in about 67, in the In-Between days, Noddy had written what was his first solo work, Buy Me a Rocking Chair. And he'd abandoned that. And I did look very hard to see if there was any kind of recording of it. And I haven't been able to find any recording they did.
It must be difficult
at the time.
It must be. Anybody out there has got it. Let us know where you can get it.
Or even has just come across a recorded version on the internet.
Yeah.
That the In-Betweens would have put together in some kind of demo type.
So buy me a rocking chair.
Yeah.
I wonder what the lyrics were.
Well, the lyrics are very similar to these.
Yeah.
The whole idea. Well, for the chorus, I mean, it was the rocking chair lyrics that we used for the chorus, and Lee wrote another melody for the verse. Noddy actually wrote most of the lyrics, and what he wanted to do, he wanted to reflect a typical British family Christmas. But if you actually weren't living through the 70s, it was a very different time. In 1973, times were quite tricky. Inflation was at 10%, and by the end of 1974, inflation was 19%. Now, that means roughly that the cost of anything is doubling every 5 years. So that is not a good thought.
Not a good way to be, is it?
There were lots of strikes. Strikes were very, very popular in the 70s. There were lots of... Every winter you'd anticipate having power cuts. Your lighting and heating would disappear almost every winter. And the famous 3-day week started on New Year's Day. Happy New Year, 1973.
Actually, the thing is, I remember all of this so well because I was, in 1973, I was 15.
Yeah.
And, where I lived, of course, you'd have the power cuts.
Yeah.
None of the street lights would come on, or if they were on, they'd go off about 7 o'clock at night. So the entire place where I lived, all the houses, all the flats, etc.,
Yeah.
was in total darkness.
Yeah.
And when you're 15 years old, it's great fun. It's fantastic to be
Absolutely.
wandering around. You might have a torch or something like that, you know, but you'd be messing around. You'd be playing football in the dark. You'd be just doing anything that a 15-year-old does, but in total darkness. Because you think, I can get away with this because no
Exactly.
one can see me.
Yeah.
For a youngster, wonderful times. If you're an adult, etc.,
Not so good.
you know, looking after a family, not so good at all.
I just realised as well, if you're wondering what the 3-day week was, it meant that unless you were in what was considered to be an essential service, there was only power to the organisation for 3 days of the week. So that would mean that you only actually earned 60% of your wages
Yep.
for that week while the 3-day week was running. I was very lucky. I worked for British Rail, as it was at that particular time, and that's obviously deemed as a necessary industry, like mining would be.
Yeah.
So we stayed working for the full week. And if you think mortgages are a problem now, the mortgage rate was 8.5% and rising. And I can remember mortgages at 15%.
Yeah, I can remember once it went to 16 for a day.
Yeah. So
I think they called it Black Wednesday or something, didn't they?
It was
In the early 80s.
not a good
I think
time.
It was. Not good at all around then.
And Noddy felt that the great British public needed cheering up. And he felt they had a lot to look forward to. Look to the future now. It's only just begun. I think that's one of the reasons why it's such a perennial hit. Actually recorded in the record plant in the July. So they were over in a steaming hot New York summer. And they recorded parts in the corridor to get better echo. And it's reckoned that he makes £500,000 royalties, or him and Jim Lee, every year. And in 2009, PRS for Music, the people who monitor all the who should get what payments and the like, reckon that 42% of the world's population had probably heard the song.
And probably owned it as well. Are they saying that? I don't think I do. What a voice. I know that some of you out there might be thinking, oh, it's a bit of an obvious tune to play. But it had a good story behind it, and what a record in itself. I mean, Noddy Holder's voice is just amazing.
Yeah.
Has anyone in rock got a more powerful voice than him?
He is.
Oh, you know, if they have, I'd like to hear it. I really would, because you know, he's definitely got to be certainly up there in the top 5 of the most powerful rock singers you've ever heard in your life.
Yeah, I mean, he has got a very distinctive voice.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons to include that as well is because of this, not so much, rivalry with Wizzard. That same Christmas, I wish it could be Christmas every day, because when you delve into that story, I mean, that in itself's got an interesting backstory. I mean, what was happening was that they were in the process of changing record companies. They were with Harvest, EMI, and they were moving over to Warner Brothers. And for some reason, they gave the song to Warner Brothers. So in the sort of early part of November, it was released. I Wish It Could Be Christmas Every Day. Wizard was released on Warner Brothers. And then Harvest noticed this, perhaps browsing through the shelves at our price or whatever, spotted this and thought, hello, what's all this here then? So they got on to Wizard and said, no, you can't be doing this. We can't be having with this. Mm-hmm. So they put their own version of the song out. So it was actually available on 2 record labels.
Oh, right.
Now, whether both of them were promoting it as hard as they could have done, they should have done.
Yeah,
I don't know, but that's.
I only remember it on the Harvest label.
Yeah, no, it's on Warner's as well.
Wow. Because if I'd have seen it on Warner, I'd have thought, oh, that must be an American release or something like that. Yeah.
No, because they moved. That was their last release on Harvest, and they moved over to Warner's. But it's great on both. If you look at the credits, and it's always interesting to see who's involved in the background. And under vocal backing, what it says on the label is vocal backing, the Suedettes, plus the Stockland Green Bilateral School first year choir, additional noises, Miss Snob, and Class C. So if you're out there, Miss Snob, what a wonderful job you and Class C did.
See, so where did you pick that up from?
It's on the label. It's the part of the label credit.
Is it really?
Underneath Wizard and Roy Wood and written by, produced by.
Yeah.
I mean, Roy Wood did write and produce
all these songs. They're obviously singles, but did they, as Christmas songs, did they ever appear on albums by the band? Did they, like you obviously would put your single on the album or take it from the album? Did they actually appear, like if the album came out in July or something? Were they on there, or did they never appear on official album releases?
If it was recorded in the summer. I wouldn't. I'd be very surprised to find it on there. I'm not. I don't recall seeing these real Christmas legend songs.
I mean, I know a few Slade albums. I mean, I've only got one, Slade Alive, and it's certainly not on that. But I mean, I can think of what's the other, Slade or Ambrose Slade, the other one, some of the earlier ones, Slade in Flame. I can't recall seeing Merry Christmas. Everybody,
I don't recall.
On any of those.
It might well be, but I don't recall ever seeing it on an album. I mean, unless the band was putting an album out for the Christmas market, to hit the shops in the November. It's very unlikely they'd include one. And unlike America, where, I mean, if you look at the Beatles songs particularly, the American record companies, Capitol, always used to like to include singles on that. But in the UK, it was very, very rare to find a single actually on the album. So you've got all kinds of different things going on there. Great. Record it in the summer. And what Roy Wood wanted to do to get some atmosphere, Christmas atmosphere, into the recording. What he did, he turned the aircon down to Arctic. He sent the roadies out to buy some fans so he could blow ice cold air across everybody. And they put up Christmas decorations sort of in the office where they were recording. And it was so cold they had to play in overcoats. But I think they really captured the spirit of Christmas there. But on the top of the pops that Christmas, there was a hopefully good-natured Custard Fight with Slade, because they obviously were both on. But what's really interesting, and the idea of maybe they missed out on number one because it was being promoted on two different labels, or maybe not being promoted on two different labels. But since then, they've both been released in the same year 11 times. Yeah. So I mean, they've all been released, but on 11 times both of them came out, and that was 1984, and then there was a run from 2007 to 2016. But if you look at which scored higher on the charts, none got back to number one, obviously, but they all did reasonably 30s, 40s, 20s. Wizard got the higher chart position 10 of those 11 times on the re-releases. I
guess with something like the Slade record, because you said it sold 500,000 copies in its first week. Yeah. I mean, unless you're one of these people who perhaps are thinking, I need to buy it on CD or whatever, I mean, would you buy it again if you've already got it?
Some people do. I mean, some people are keen to get all kinds of versions. I mean, the Slade one particularly, I know, has been released on white label, 12-inch, various 12-inch releases. So there are, I mean, completists would get them. But it could be that because of that particular volume, there weren't so many people left to buy it.
And of course, they're all on the old Christmas albums, aren't they? Your Now Christmas and all that sort of stuff.
It's difficult to find a classic Christmas album without either of those two particular songs on. Oh, just while I think about it, tomorrow is a big day in the Derrick calendar.
Oh, yeah.
And the East Grinstead calendar. I'm actually signing copies of Rock and Roll Unravelled at the bookshop on I think it's 22 at the High Street, East Grinstead. So if you're out and about Christmas shopping, please pop in, say hello, and please say, oh, I heard you and Dave on Dave's show last night. And what a fine show it was. So that would be great.
That would be good.
And then I thought the last one we'd look at, another one I really like, that's got an interesting background. Greg Lake, 1975. I Believe in Father Christmas. I mean, that's another one that made it to number 2. That was kept off the top by Bohemian Rhapsody. So I suppose if you've got to compete with something, if you've got to lose out to something, it might as well be a song that spent 9 weeks at number 1 and is regularly voted the best single of all time. I mean, that was written by Greg Lake and Pete Sinfield. I mean, they worked together in King Crimson.
Yeah.
But I mean, Greg Lake's got an interesting background. I mean, he was in bands called The Gods, King Crimson, before Emerson, Lake and Palmer. And The Gods is one of those British mid-60s R&B groups, highly respected by other groups and fans alike, but never really had an awful lot of success. But if you look at the original founders, it was Ken Hensley, keyboards. He went on to Uriah Heep. Mick Taylor, he went on to replace Brian Jones in the Rolling Stones. And John Glasscock, he was the bass player. He went on to Chicken Shack and Jethro Tull. But the song itself, it's based on Prokofiev's Lieutenant Kijé suite, written for a 1933 Russian movie of the same name. But one of the things I do love here is that when it was released in America in 1934, it translated so that the movie title was "The Tsar Wants to Sleep." Now, how on earth can you come up with a movie title like that? Absolutely awesome. And apparently, the song itself was written as an attack on commercialism. He didn't like the commercialism.
He didn't indeed, did he? No. But great song, though. Great song. Derek, as usual, been a mind of information. Absolutely fantastic. I was talking to somebody in the pub the other day, and he said how much he likes it when you come in and all the things you come up with.
Oh, that's
really
great.
Enjoys
Thanks.
it. Derek will be back after 10 o'clock news.
Absolutely.
We'll be doing what happened on this day throughout the years.
Christmassy stuff.
Christmassy stuff, definitely. But taking us up to the 9 o'clock news. A bit of Greg Lake.